Hi, my name is Scott Dowdle, and I'd like to tell you about the MiSTer FPGA Project, which tries to preserve hardware for retro arcade systems, consoles and handhelds, and computer systems. The first question most people have is, what is an FPGA? It's an acronym that stands for Field Programmable Gate Array, and it's basically a processor on a single board computer that can dynamically use logic elements to shift and move around and transform like a transformer. One moment it's a car, one moment it's an airplane, a robot. The logical elements within the FPGA can be rearranged through the use of a hardware description language by a programmer who can describe the hardware, and the FPGA will basically rearrange itself and organize itself to become that hardware. And FPGAs are used for most IC and CPU development. It's a way that people can design hardware, whether it be a single chip or a motherboard with multiple components and or a circuit, those sorts of things. They can do it in FPGA and change it, move it around before they decide that it has all the bugs worked out and they want to actually make the physical hardware. It allows them to design it. So it's easy to create, test, and modify before committing to fixed application-specific integrated circuits, or ASICs. And that flexibility and those logical elements are very expensive, so they're way more expensive than a regular CPU in a computer. The MiSTer project has adopted an FPGA development board from a company named Terasic, and they have a number of different boards, but the one that MiSTer project is using is the DE10 Nano. And the reason that one was picked is because it's got a nice HDMI output for really good video and audio. So all the stuff you run on it, you can use it on a nice display. That board uses a Cyclone 5 FPGA, and there's different models of the Cyclone 5, but the one that's on that board has 110,000 logical elements. And it's also integrated with a dual-core ARM Cortex A9 processor that runs at 800 megahertz. That ARM processor is quite dated, and the Cyclone 5 has been around for quite a while. I want to say it's been around for about 8 to 10 years. Same goes for that ARM processor. That ARM processor, if you're used to Raspberry Pis, it's probably a Raspberry Pi 1 or Raspberry Pi 2 so far as speed. So it's not very powerful. You wouldn't want to run a desktop environment on it or anything. But what we're using mostly is the Cyclone in the FPGA portion of it. It's got 1 gigabyte of DDR3. Again, DDR3 RAM shows you kind of the age of it. It's got a 1 gigabit Ethernet port for wired networking. Does not have Wi-Fi, but you can add a USB dongle with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth if you'd like. As I previously mentioned, it's got HDMI video and audio out. It has a micro USB on the go port that you can plug a USB hub into, and that'll allow you to plug in controllers or other any kind of USB devices like Wi-Fi adapter, a Bluetooth adapter, a USB thumb drive for storing ROMs, or an external hard drive, those sorts of things. It comes with a micro SD card slot, and the board, when you buy it from Terasic, it comes with a few cables and a power supply, and it also includes an 8 gigabyte card, which is enough to store all the arcade games from the MiSTer for now. But because there's so many cores and you want room to put your game ROMs, it will take up to a 1 terabyte card. I myself am currently using 256 gigabyte cards, and I've got so much content on there I feel like I might want to move up to 512 at some point. It has several I/O connectors that are used for adding additional things. The DE Terasic training that people get, Terasic makes some additional add-ons, but so far as the MiSTer project is concerned, they'll be using boards that were designed by people from the MiSTer project for additional functionality, and I'll talk about some of those boards later. All right, so here's what the DE10 Nano looks like. That large square chip that says Altera in there, that's the Cyclone 5, that is the ARM and the FPGA in one package there. Next to that is the RAM. I've got some more pictures that kind of identify that stuff. There it is with the cover taken off and the stands taken off. And here's a diagram that comes in a little card inside the box that shows you where all the things are. So if you want to pause the video and take a better look at that and read that, you certainly can. This is the HDMI port. This is USB. And here's another Minimig, and I'm not sure which one of these is the on-the-go port. I'm not sure, but one of those you can plug a USB hub into. Here's the Ethernet port, and this is used to plug in accessory boards designed by the MiSTer project, and this is used for the SD-RAM board that I'll talk about shortly. Here's the back of the board. About the only thing of note there is the micro SD card slot is there, but you can access it from the side of the board. So what can that board and the MiSTer project software do? Well, they have a lot of open source FPGA cores that exist for lots of retro devices. So for example, they have over 500 arcade machine cores. About at the time of recording this video in November of 2022, they had 60 different retro computers to pick from. And then consoles and handhelds, over 39 of those. And I'll go over many of those, but not all of them. So arcade machines, over 500. Usually we'll get one or more added per week, and if not every single week, maybe a few per month. Or every other week. There's always some developer working on them. Now, how do they churn out so many things? Well, the developer who sort of manages the project, his name is Sorlig. He has a framework that gives a lot of functionality to anybody making a core. So they basically have a suite of functions where they can easily output the audio and the video and take the input from the controllers and do all that kind of stuff. And there is a large library of different components that exist. A lot of them predate the MiSTer project and things that have been ported to the Cyclone 5 and the MiSTer project. So for example, a Motorola 68000 processor, a 68020, Zilog Z80 processors, quite a few sound chips. A lot of the very common components that are found in retro computers, consoles, and arcade systems from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And with that large library of components, as long as you're trying to create something in the machine description language that uses some of those off-the-shelf components, you've already got those, and you can just plop them into your design. Where developers have to do a lot of work is where they're trying to implement something that has one or more custom chips that may or may not have schematics available for them. In that case, they usually have to do a lot of research and sometimes even using etching, laser etching or asset etching to peel away layers of the processor and take high-resolution photography so that they can get detailed views of the circuits and try to figure out how they work inside of the custom chips. But yeah, there's lots of arcades. I will kind of give you a sampling of them. I'll switch over to my MiSTer. And let me show you first how long it takes to boot up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to restart it. So if I go here and I hold down my controller button for a few seconds, there we go, it will restart. And this runs a special purpose built flavor of Linux that boots really quickly. And there we go. That's how long it takes to boot. Now that little RAM chip next to the word MiSTer there, and now it just showed the Wi-Fi, because I've got a USB Wi-Fi adapter plugged into my MiSTer, and it shows a little Bluetooth logo. I've got a Bluetooth dongle plugged into my MiSTer as well. It'll tell you the time and everything. I don't have my time zone correct because I didn't record this at 4 in the afternoon or 4 in the morning. It's actually November 24th today. Anywho, this is where you can see the arcades that are available, the computers that are available, the consoles that are available. There are some sort of MiSTer specific little games that they have, like chess, Flappy Bird, the Game of Life. I really haven't messed with those too much, so I mean they're not really that complex. But whenever you see a dot dot, you can just hit your controller's A button, or use your keyboard if you have a keyboard plugged into it to go back up a menu. The B button will back out to the main menu, and here you can do things like run scripts. And the one very popular script to run would be this update all that's not actually shipped as part of the MiSTer project. It's a third-party script that will update all of the official MiSTer cores and content. And also you can configure it to also check repositories from quite a few third-party developers to get additional cores that aren't officially part of the MiSTer project. But the bulk of the content does come from the official MiSTer project. Anyway, I got in here to show you the cores. Specifically, let me get back out. There we go. Okay, arcade cores. So here are all the arcade cores. And there are pages and pages of them. As I said, there's over 500. I want to say there's about 530. Stuff from early Atari, early Sega, Capcom 1, 1.5, and 2. So you can see a lot of the Capcom games with the 1941, 1943. And the software ROMs are borrowed from the MiSTer project. They borrow them from the MAME project, which is a software-based emulator project that's been around for a few decades. Well, in the MiSTer, they're implementing all of the original arcade board hardware in FPGA and then running the software on that implemented hardware. Oh, I don't know. How about something old school like Joust? You can hit the right arrow and go down page at a time, or you can hit your up and down arrows to go down one at a time. So I'm going to go to A, B, C, D, F, G, J, J. Where is Joust? Oh, there it is up there. We've got Joust and Joust 2. I'm going to pick Joust here. And when you do it, it's just like turning on the original arcade system, and it'll go through its power on self-test if it has one. And sometimes that can take a little bit of time. Whenever it's on there, you can hit your menu button and you can define your controls. So I'm going to go ahead and do that because I don't know if I've done that on here. So I'm going to say right is that button, left, down, up, flap, start player 1, start player 2, put in a coin, and I don't know what advance is. And I'm going to skip auto up and pause. And then whenever you make changes, you always want to save your settings. All right, so I'm going to get out of there. I'm going to deposit a coin. And then I am going to start. And this is the authentic Joust game. All right. What else do we have? That's a really old school one. I can hit my menu button. It'll pause the game. I can pick a different core here. Let's say Street Fighter 2. Because we have CPS 1 and 2, that's not officially part of the MiSTer project. It comes from a prolific MiSTer developer named Hotego, and he's implemented a lot of arcade cores. So here's Street Fighter. How about Street Fighter Hyper Fighting World? I'm not sure what that is. I'm not into Street Fighter, so I don't know a whole lot about it, but I just kind of want to show you. Then we've got a number of cave shooters to pick from. That's done by yet another developer. I hope the audio is coming through on this. Should be. I guess maybe there's not any audio yet. But again, I can define the buttons on the controller. I could switch to a different controller that'd be more appropriate for a fighting game. All right, I'm going to switch to, let's say, Dodonpachi as an example of a cave shooter. There we go. Now some of these load in the ROMs, and again these come from the main project, and the download all will go get all of the cores that are available for the MiSTer, as well as get all of the ROMs for the main project to run. So this is Dodonpachi. Give it a credit. Let me go. I don't know that I've set the buttons on this yet, so let me do that real quick. Again, whenever you make settings changes, make sure you save the settings so you don't have to go through that again. Alrighty, so I'm going to hit start. Oh, let me give you credit. Hit start.
Okay, the countdown begins. 3, 2, 1, go.
Alrighty, I'm not necessarily good at this, but this is a quite very busy bullet hell. If you've ever played any of the cave arcade machines, this is a lot of stuff going on. Alright, you get the idea. But I'll just go through here and show you the cores, just so you can see some of the ones there. The Espradi, that's another cave shooter. I think that's a relatively new addition. It's a shooter, I believe. Let's see, Fantasy Zone 1 and 2 from Sega are in there. Food Fight, that's an old one. Frenzy, Frogger, Galaga's in there, of course. We've got Galaga 3, Galaxian. Gang Wars is a new addition, I believe. GA Plus is another flavor of Galaga. Gauntlet and Gauntlet 2, and those can be multiplayer. Gemini Wing, Ghosts and Goblins. Ghouls and Ghosts, Gigawing. Gigawing, of course, being another Capcom game. Golden Axe from Sega, Gorf. Gunsmoke, Gyrus. That one is a cave shooter as well. Let's see. Journey, that's another one. Joust, I already showed. Joust 2. Of course, we've got Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Missile Command, all of those early games. Anyway, you get the idea. There's a lot of content, including probably about 10 or 12. You know, X-Men, Marvel superheroes, Street Fighter versus Marvel superheroes, Street Fighter versus X-Men, all that stuff. If you're feeling the fighting games. Cubert, one of my favorite games. That particular core does not have the little speaking chip that goes, you know, when he's cussing. They couldn't find a schematic for that, so that game does not have that, nor does it have the little hammer at the bottom to make that sound when it hits the bottom. Just a bit of trivia. We've got R-Type, R-Type 2, Zeroing, Robotron. Oh my God, Robotron. You can use the dual sticks just like you do in the arcade, and that plays wonderfully. Defender, Stargate, even some Mario Brothers and Nintendo stuff in there. Anyway, that's the arcade cores. I could go on forever. I will reset the MiSTer just so I can make the sound go away. Again, it only takes a few seconds to boot the thing, so let me go back to my slides. So yeah, lots and lots of arcade games. And of course, when I say arcade games, I mean the boards that were in these stand-up arcades. They have implemented those boards in FPGA that will run the main ROMs. Neo Geo is another prolific arcade system that was around for about a decade, and they had machines that played one game or 4 games, and you could pick which game. And even though that's an arcade, the Neo Geo is included in the console section, which I'll get to later. Lots of computers, 8-bit, 16, 32, 32-bit, even some mini and mainframes. So we've got the Altair 8800, the first commercial computer kit that was available, and then later you could get it pre-assembled. We've got the Apple original, the Apple I and the Apple II. So if you ever used the Apple II in school, you can relive your days from that. It's got the TI-994A. It's got a range of Sinclair computers, starting with the ZX81 in the United States. That was called the Timex Sinclair 1000. That happens to be the first computer that I used. And then the second one there is the ZX Spectrum, or ZX if you're from Europe. And that was a very popular gaming system in the UK and Europe, and lots of kids in the mid-80s, that was their primary game machine. To the right of that is the Sinclair QL, which is a Motorola 68000 based system. And then below that, that is the Spectrum, the Spectrum Next, which is a modern day crowd-funded project where they remade a Spectrum from an FPGA and gave it more color, more RAM, better sound, and all that kind of stuff, and a better basic. But those are pretty expensive, and they're hard to get. They'll make batches of them, and then they'll sell out. So right now, I don't think you can buy one until sometime in 2023. But that core has been ported to the MiSTer, so even though you can't buy one right now, you can run the software from that on the MiSTer, no problem. Of course, we have Commodore 8-bit systems with the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64. I think there's also a Plus 4 and maybe an entry-level Commodore 128 core that someone's working on. We have the Atari 8-bit series, and we have the Tandy Color Computer 2 and 3, the BBC Micro, and I'm not going to show you the computers except maybe for the Atari and the MiSTer. Excuse me, the Atari and the Amiga. The name MiSTer actually comes from a previous project called MIST, and the MI stands for Amiga, and the ST stands for Atari ST, and then so the namesake of the MiSTer project is the Atari ST and the Amiga. Acorn Electron, Amstrad CPC, we have the MSX, and I think it's the 2 and the 3 as well. And that is a Japanese gaming system that was a standard developed by Microsoft that had hardware implementations by various manufacturers. There's an example of a Sony model there. But that was a big gaming machine in the mid-'80s in Japan. So if you wanted to experience a lot of these games we didn't have access to here in the United States, get going with that core. Games play very well on that. Acorn Archimedes, that was an early system that had a graphical environment. It ran an operating system called RISC OS and had a graphical desktop. You can see it's got a mouse there in the picture. Amstrad PCW, TRS Model 80 Model 1, and of course the Commodore Amiga, which I will show you. I don't have a mouse hooked up, but I'll just show you a little bit of that. So let me go back over to my MiSTer, and I'm going to go down to Computer. And then I'm going to go to Minimig, which is the name of the core. That's why it begins with M and I. I guess I missed it here. Here we go. And I've got this set up that there's a YouTuber named Video Game Esoterica or something very close to that. And he made a video here about 10 days ago that shows how to set up the Amiga. Pretty much you just download a curated hard drive image, and it's got all the games and some applications pre-installed and a nice game menu. So you can let me configure my controller. Oh, I guess there isn't a save configure like some of the arcade cores. But anyway, it's got this game launcher. Let me just get out of the menu. And you can see different games. And if you go to, they've got the different, it's got art for them and tells you about them and who made them. And if you just hit a key, it'll load it up. Might have like a little display screen here. And then you can load the game. I haven't used any of these yet. I'm relatively new to this course, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you much about it. Sensible software. And if you're not into games, you can still use the Amiga core to, can I get out of the game? I'm sure there's a way to do that. Maybe it's on the keyboard. Come on. I'll just reload the core because I don't know what the hotkeys are yet. Sorry about that. Again, doesn't take but a second to do that. And I didn't restart the MiSTer, I just restarted the core. Now I know if I can hit the escape key, I can get into the Workbench desktop. And if I had a mouse hooked up, I could show you all that. So you've got the full desktop environment that the Amiga had. So anyway, let me just reset the MiSTer back so it'll be ready for the next thing I want to show you. Let me switch back over to my slides. All right, and this Amiga core provides a 68030 base system and a 68020. So I think it's the equivalent of an Amiga 2000 and lower. And it should be able to run all the games and demos. And there's lots of videos on YouTube showing some of the more advanced demos running. So if those run and the games run, you know it's a high quality implementation of it. Okay, the Atari ST is the other part of its namesake. And again, I don't have a mouse plugged in. Why didn't I do that? Anyway, I will show you that real briefly. I followed a tutorial from a guy, a YouTuber named Pez82, and he has a curated hard drive image and shows you how to set it up, and you've just got a large selection of games. So let me go down to Atari ST. I'm not going to run anything or do anything. I'll just show you that it brings up the Atari desktop. Ooh, I guess I haven't set that up yet. I think I need to pick a toss image. There we go. And then I also need to pick a hard disk image. There's a 3 gigabyte Atari disk image. And what else? I think I was told that thing starts up quicker if you put a blank disk in drive A. Right now it's going through the self-test. So we'll get rid of the menu and hit escape to get out of that. And then we should get let me restart that. Now we should hopefully get a desktop after it gets through with its Power 1 self-test. There we go. There we go. It came up in low res, and you've got medium res, and it also provides the high res. So you can do all three of the different resolutions from the Atari ST. And as you can see, there's separate partitions with different types of software, and there are some application software on there. And if you look on archive.org, you can find pretty much the vast majority of application programs that were ever made. So if you want to use the thing as a computer, you can, or if you want to use it as a game machine, you can. All right, let me reset the MiSTer. There we go. All right, let me get back to the slides and get moving. I don't want this video to take forever. We've got a Mac Plus. I don't have that set up, but there is a tutorial on how to do that and a disk image. And it is for 512K mono Mac, I believe, and I think it can run up to maybe the OS 7 series. And you can run all the applications from that period of time. There's a 46SX core that runs all the DOS games. There's a curated hard disk image and several videos on how to set that up that has the top 300 DOS games. So you can play Doom and quite a few of the early games from DOS and all the Sierra games. It even supports MIDI if you want to do the MIDI music as well. There's a PDP-1 that is machine the first the first video game was made on with that radar type screen that's on the left there, and it uses vector graphics. And the core comes with the Space War game that I mentioned, the first video game in history, and also comes with some graphics demos from that. So it's not really meant to be, you know, the full functionality of thing, but you can run some of the programs and demos that are provided with it. There's also someone implemented just to retain it for posterity, the EDSAC mainframe computer, which is from 1948. Now let's jump into the consoles and the handhelds that are supported. Again, we have some of the early stuff, really early stuff, 8-bit, 16-bit, 16-bit / 32-bit, 32-bit systems. We got a couple of those, one ready and one that's almost done. What about 64-bit systems? Do you know about any of those? Well, there is a Jaguar core that's not officially in the MiSTer project yet. It's been developed by a few different developers, and they just can't quite find the documentation to make it 100% compatible with all the Jaguar games. But it will. Some of the games will work. But again, since it's not done, I think it's kind of abandoned at the moment. So we don't really have that core, but if you hunt it down, you can play with it. All right, we've got the Atari 2600, which is the first console that I had, the 5200, the 7800, and the Atari Lynx. And I'll quickly show you all of those. I'm just going to run one game from each of them so you can see kind of what the experience is like. So I'm going to go down to console, and I'm going to pick Atari 2600. And some of these cores, they just load and they don't tell you anything. This one brings up a screen. Now the 7800 core, I know I picked 2600. The 7800 Atari hardware actually was backwards compatible with the 2600 games as well. So they implemented the 7800, which gives you that 2600 compatibility. Well, you hit the menu button, you click on load, and I've got a nice supply of ROMs for the Atari 2600. Let's go to Space Invaders. I think that should be in here. There we go. There we go. And you've got buttons that map to the various toggle switches on the 2600. Now let me show you the 5200. That's slightly better. Again, hit the menu button, load a ROM. Let's say Bounty Bob Strikes Back. Alrighty, I don't know much about that game, but now I'll show you the 7800 real quickly. Oops. Let me click load a different core. You can see how quickly I switch between cores. It just takes it a second. Well, I was already showed you that one a second ago. But now we're actually going to run some 78 programs. Let's see, what do we want? Let's see. I don't know, Donkey Kong? See how quickly that game runs? My capture device says that it doesn't show the video, so let's see, how about Galaga? Is that gonna, for whatever reason, my capture device is not getting the resolution that's putting out there. Alright. Well, let me get back to the slides. On my HDMI TV, it's coming out just fine. Sorry about the capture problem. Alright. Trust me, it does work. We have the Sega Master System, the Genesis, the CD add-on for the Genesis called the Mega CD, the 32X add-on for the Genesis, as well as the Game Gear Handheld. And hopefully these will show up on my capture device. Let's try those. Console. Let's go to Sega Master System, which is simply called SMS in the console menu. Then I hit the menu and I can pick some games. How about Alien Syndrome? We have the arcade game of that. There we go. That shows up in the capture device. That's good. So that's the Sega Master System. Let's switch cores again. Let's do the Genesis. Where'd it go? There it is. And again, hit the menu button to bring up the load or on-screen display OSD. Let's say Beauty and the Beast. All right, you get the idea. All right, now let's try the Mega CD. And it actually has the firmware of the CD, and we hit the menu button to load an ISO image. Let's see, I don't know. Echo the Dolphin. Then you hit the start button and it'll actually load the software from the optical media file. And it will be faster than the original hardware was because it's loading from an SD card, but there still would be a little bit of loading time. All right, here we go. And then what else? The Game Gear. Oops. Let me show you the Game Gear. There we go. The Game Gear is basically a handheld Sega Master System. So how about that? Hopefully that we won't have it. Yeah. Capture device is working great. All right. So anyway, yeah, Game Gear. I'll reboot the MiSTer again. You don't have to reboot it all the time. I'm just doing it to get back out to the main menu easily. Go back to my slides here. So all of that hardware is supported. From Nintendo, we've got the NES, the Super NES, the Game Boy, and notice there's two little Game Boys next to it, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance, and then there's two little Game Boy Advances below that, and I'll tell you what those double things are in a second. We've got a Game & Watch that runs about 8 different Game & Watch games, and also someone implemented the Pokemon Mini that has a very low resolution display on its monochrome, but you know, seeing that on a gigantic HDMI TV can be a little jarring, but yeah, you can still play it. So let me show you those cores real quickly. So again, I go down to console, and go down to NES. Load it, and this also does the floppy disk based games that were only, that device and the games for that were only released in Japan, and this thing will handle them too. I mean, there's just so many games to pick from. I don't know, how about this Contra? And yay, my capture device is getting it just fine. There we go, that's the NES. What else? Okay, let's go to Super NES, which is SNES. And of course, I'm not going to do any game playing. And it can do all the different chips that were available in some of the cartridges. And I think that's under special chip games and the way I have my ROMs organized. And I believe I can do, oh, I just passed it. Star Fox. So the Star Fox cartridge actually had a graphics coprocessor in it, and the MiSTer core for the SNES implements all of those special chips that were in a few dozen of the SNES game cartridges, and those were very expensive cartridges because it's got additional hardware in there. Anyway, you know, if you've seen the Star Fox intro once, you've probably seen it a million times, so I'm not going to let that continue. Okay, let's show the Game Boy. Now the little logo that comes down before you load any ROMs can sometimes be missing or distorted, but once you actually load a game in there, it'll be normal. I don't know what to pick. Harvest Moon. There we go. And there are different palettes to pick from, and also cheats, and most of the cores have cheats and different palettes and video and audio options that you can pick. I usually just stick with the basics and the defaults, but if you really want to drill down into that and get fancy, you certainly can. Anyway, you can see that that works. Let's do the Game Boy Color. Oh, guess I don't have my ROMs in the right place. I think I have them in my Game Boy folder. There we go. That's a faux pas on my part. Army Men, Air Combat. So Game Boy Color works. And what else? Game Boy Advance. Let me load that. That's the GBA in this list here. Fantasy Star Collection. Must be Sega ported stuff. Okay, I don't have, oh, I think maybe I do have the Game & Watch, which is listed as G&W. And I'm not sure I know how to play these, but I do have a few of them. And when you first turn it on, it shows you all the possible pieces of the animation. And once you start it, it acts just like a regular Game & Watch. And I don't have the Pokemon Mini. But what about those 2 cores? So let's just show you the Game Boy 2 core. And you can load a Game Boy game. I don't have a second controller hooked up, so I'm not sure how I can do this. But what this does is it puts the 2 games side by side with a virtual link cable, and you can play head to head or as a team on the games that are 2-player. That's top and bottom. So if I had a second controller plugged in, I could load I can continue. So if you got two displays, and here's the options on it. Let's see, split, show the line between the 2. I would rather be horizontal, so the first Game Boy Advance is on the left and the second Game Boy Advance is on the right. And the first controller would be the player on the left, and the second controller would be the player on the right. If you happen to have the analog I/O board option for your MiSTer, you can actually have that drive an analog screen for a full screen second player, and the HDMI can be full screen for the first player. So this thing, again, was originally created so that you could play head-to-head games, but now they've got it to where you can just have 2 completely different games if you want to, and have 2 different players playing 2 different games at the same time. Because the core is two Game Boy Advances, or two Game Boys, which is pretty amazing if you ask me. And I'm going to get back to the menu. Did I reboot the core? Yeah, okay. Go back to the slide deck. All right. We've got a Wonder Swan, both the black and white and in color. One of the original creators of the Game Boy system went to another company, and they made a Game Boy competitor that was only released in Japan, if I understand correctly. And it could play vertically or horizontally. And their first model was black and white, and then they had a color model. Well, it'll play all of those games. I'm not going to show you that core just for time. We've got a TurboGrafx 16 core. That was a popular console in Japan called the PC Engine. In the United States, it was called TurboGrafx 16. It sold okay here in the United States, but it really just couldn't compete with the Genesis and the Super NES. But it's a very capable game machine. Got a lot of good games. And the MiSTer core also does the Super version of it. That was at the tail end of that, and they only had like 5 games for that. And it also, I don't have a picture of that, but it also supports the TurboGrafx CD. And I will show you those real quickly because those games load pretty quickly, and you can get an idea what that looks like. Again, I'm not going to play them. Console, scroll down to TurboGrafx 16. Hit my menu button once the core is loaded, and I can pick any of the TurboGrafx 16 games that are mostly all in English. I would think all of them are in English. I saw something about Dragon. Let's see. Dragon Spirit. Let's look at that. Alrighty. And it also does the PC Engine games, which the same format. I just are in a separate folder, but these are most of these I think are Japanese. Some of them may have English options in them. I don't know. Let's say Bonk 2. That's kind of one of their mascots was Bonk. So there we go. Those games load really quickly. And now to show you the Super Graphics. There weren't that many games for it, but we've got they'll work. So here's Darius Alpha. And now I'll show you the CD games. Let's go Lord of Thunder. Very popular game with some rockin' music. And then once that comes up, excuse me, you hit the start button and that'll load the optical media file in there. This was a selling point for many people in the United States so they could play this game. It's got some, like I said, really rockin' soundtrack. This game is also available for the Genesis. I think maybe on CD there as well. I'm not sure. But the 2 games are very similar, but there's slight differences between some of the backgrounds and the audio. So anyway, won't let that get too far here. Those work great. We've got the Neo Geo, and I'll be happy to show you that. Again, that was an arcade system, and they also had a consoleized version that cost like $700 in the 90s. The most expensive console in history by today's money. I want to think that's like $1,200 or something. But that's located in the console section. Under Neo Geo. All right. So, Neo Geo is known for lots and lots of fighting games and sword fighting games, but they had some platformers, some shooters. Let me find one that's not. Well, I don't know. How about Metal Slug X? Got all the Metal Slug games there. Those are very popular. Those have been ported to lots of different consoles. But this is the actual arcade version. And of course, you get the startup that you'd see on the Neo Geo systems.
Metal Slug X.
So yeah, it runs all the Neo Geo games very nicely. The developer behind this core actually predates the MiSTer project and worked for a company that repairs and maintains Neo Geo hardware, and they were running out of parts, so they implemented all the parts that they needed in FPGA and had them manufactured so that they make their own parts these days. And then once the MiSTer project came along, they kind of put it into a core, all the different parts and everything, and this is a very cycle accurate core. Anyway. A lot of big fans of the Neo Geo, and it works very well. Vectrex I won't show, but it is a very early console that has vector graphics. That's why the display is part of the console, because you needed that display to show the games. And we have a wonderful PlayStation core. A developer named Robert Pipe, P-E-I-P. He started working on this in August or September of 2021, and he had it basically completed by the summer of 2022. And since the summer of 2022 till now, he's been fixing a lot of the obscure bugs that are found in certain games, and also running all kinds of tests to see the cycle speed on various operations of the video processor, the audio processor, and the I/O and all that kind of stuff. And he's improving the core to make it as cycle accurate as possible. And he usually writes a blog post on his Patreon for his Patreon subscribers and tells, you know, all the stuff that he's been doing and how he's able to make it so cycle accurate. And he's added a whole lot of features to it. And so it goes above and beyond just the original hardware. So, wow, what should I show you there? Console, PSX. And hopefully, yeah, okay, good. No capture issues there. Then you hit the thing and you can load a disk image. Almost all the ROMs, the cores that do use optical disk images can take .iso, bin/q files, or CHD files. I like CHD files because they are highly compressed. What do I pick? Oh, I don't know. How about what's that racing game? Gran Turismo. There it is. And a lot of these games have a lot of FMV and introduction videos and music. So if I start hearing some commercial music, I might have to change the game real quick because I don't want to get struck down for copyright violation on the music. But quite a few people have compared this to the original hardware side by side, and it is very close to perfect. Okay, let's load something else. Need for Speed. Well, we got more than just racing games. Resident Evil 3. The reason I keep looking up here is because the TV that I'm looking at is on the wall to my left. Sorry about funny angle there. And these will load a little faster than the original slow CD-ROMs would. I might have been monkeying with the settings. Every once in a while I'll mess with something and it'll make a game not load, or it'll take a little longer to load. How about Tekken 3? That's the first PlayStation game I've had an issue with. Maybe if I was just more patient. This core, as I mentioned, has a lot of features and a lot of settings. You can stretch the screen and it will do it where the aspect ratio in 3D games is not distorted at all. It can give you more frames per second than the original hardware did, and that sort of thing. Okay, so you can see that this works. If you start, you can get out of the full motion video thing. I'm not into the fighters, so I don't know much about it, but I'll just let it come up so you can see that the game works.
Round 1, fight.
Okay, that's enough of that. Oops, I didn't mean to pick that. All right. We also have a Saturn core that's in development by a developer who lives in Ukraine called SRG320, I think is his handle. And the Saturn core is, that's just a guesstimate. It's about 90% done, and he's been putting a lot of work into it. I think he's been working on it for like a year and a half now. But the problem with the PlayStation core and the Saturn core, and those two developers have just done a monumental effort, is those two consoles have a lot of custom chips. And I think they get a lot of their information from the software emulators who have figured out kind of how the system works, but they still have to design all the circuits and the chips and all that kind of stuff and connect them properly and get them working. It's amazing that the PlayStation developer was able to get the full PlayStation and then had enough room left over with 110,000 logical elements to add the additional features that he did. The Saturn core, hopefully it will fit, and I don't know if he's going to be able to add some additional features. But while he was developing this, he also gave us the 32X core, which I forgot to show. But there's some chips in the 32X, which is an add-on for the Genesis, that are also in the Saturn. So as part of developing the Saturn, he was able to kind of work on the 32X core, get that done, and released it just out of the blue. No one even knew he was working on it. Let me show you the 32X core. I don't have the the Saturn beta core installed. It doesn't get pulled in by the update script. You have to kind of manually download it from the MiSTer Discord and then copy it over to your SD card and put ROMs on there. I just haven't done on this particular image that I'm using. But I can show you the 32X, which I think I neglected to show you earlier when I showed you all the Sega stuff. What should I show you? I don't know. Star Wars seems to be a popular one people show on YouTube a lot. So anyway, there are quite a few people keeping up with the releases of the beta version of the Saturn core, and as new releases come out, they have a spreadsheet of all the games, and they test them all to see which ones that weren't previously working are now working, or how far they've gotten. And I think there's about 107 playable games on the Saturn core. And when I say that, that doesn't mean that they're 100% perfect. There may be some audio glitches. There may be some play this game.
Attention all wing pilots. Stand by to receive orders.
Anyway, that's enough of that.
Wipe out enemy fighters.
But the Saturn core is coming along, and there's quite a few games that are working really, really well that are pretty close to being, 100% of the experience. But there's a lot of games that don't boot at all, or just crash at the menu, or they'll play for a little bit and then freeze. So it's going to take some time, and hopefully he can get that done. And I am a Patreon subscriber to all of the developers that are listed in the Discord page, including Sorg and the Neo Geo guy, the Core Shooter guy, and of course the Saturn guy, and the PSX guy. Now let's talk about the MiSTer hardware and some of the add-on. So if you want to start out on a budget, you can get the DE10 Nano board for between $220 and $230. Different retailers sell that. A lot of them are sold out. I think you need to go through Terasic, the company's website, and order direct from them, and they can usually ship it in a day or two. Now, a couple of years ago, the pricing was about $120 and about $99 for the academic version. But because of the pandemic, part shortages and all that kind of stuff, and of course the increasing demand for those boards by MiSTer users, because the MiSTer project is taking off and there's a lot more MiSTer users, the prices have gone up. Don't know if they'll come back down or not, but so you can get a DE10 Nano for about $220, and that comes with the power supply and a small SD card and an HDMI cable. And then you can get a small USB hub and plug in your controllers and hook it up to HDMI, and you're good to go for the cores that don't require the SD RAM card. But there's a handful of cores that you can run without the SD RAM card. But if you want to invest a little bit more, you can get that for about $55 or so. And then there's also an optional USB board that's a little fancier than just using a USB hub. So here's the SD RAM card. It's 128 megabytes. Some of the bigger Neo Geo cores require it, and I think quite a few of the arcade cores require it. The 128 megs. There were smaller RAM cards available for cheaper, like 32 megabyte and 64 megabyte, but now so many of them use the 128 that I don't think they sell the smaller ones anymore. And again, that goes for about $55 depending on where you buy it. You can find it on eBay and Amazon and from retailers like MiSTer Add-ons. Here's the USB board. You can just use a $5 or $10 USB hub if you want to. This USB board costs about $55 depending on where you buy it. I forgot to mention, but the schematics for all of these optional add-ons are available. So if you're the kind of person who wants to do it yourself, you can certainly do that, or you could go through PCBWay and have them built. But there's quite a few retailers and people who make them. You can just buy them off the shelf pre-made. Here's the analog I/O board, and it gives the VGA out over here. It's got analog audio out as well, and it has a fan to cool the processor on the DE10 Nano, and that goes above it. There's the digital I/O board. I don't know much about it. I know it has digital audio out, but I'm not sure what else it has. It's not as popular as the analog one. Oh, the analog one, you can drive arcade CRTs, VGA displays, and lots of different things. So with this, you can have an analog display and an HDMI display off your MiSTer at the same time. So sort of the more traditional thing for everybody who wants to fully deck out and have all the features, you've got the DE10 Nano there in the middle. You've got the SD RAM on the side here. The analog on top and the USB board on bottom, and that's called the traditional sandwich layout. And of course you probably want to get a case for that, and there's quite a few different designs. Some of them are the model files for them are public, and you could go to a makerspace if you're so inclined and do that. There are 3D printable cases as well. Here I just show the acrylic case. That's what I bought one of those off of eBay, I think for like $35 a year ago. They come in different colors, and the metal case, I think that comes from MiSTer Add-ons, and that's about $80. That's a really sweet case, and it also has a heat sink inside of it, so I think it can passively cool the MiSTer, and you don't even need a fan if you don't want to use a fan. A YouTuber from RMC the Retro, RMC the Cave on YouTube, partnered with a company called Heber. He sort of has a museum above the Heber company in the same building, I believe. And anyway, they make this board, and this board replaces the RAM. It replaces the USB board. It replaces the analog board. And I don't know about digital audio, but it also has a SCART connector for those folks in Europe who want to use SCART connectors. It has a custom cartridge or card slot for some additional products they're coming out with. Here's the RAM module, and that can't be cut out if for some reason we get bigger ones in the future or something. But and anyway, the DE10 Nano fits on here upside down and has some wires that plug into it, and it runs all of the I/O to the back. And you've got some controllers in the front, and here's the user port, so you can use original controllers that I'll talk about here in a second. So here is that board with the DE10 Nano flipped over and plugged into it, and you can see the cables that plug into that. They've got a little fan on the side, and there is one of the cartridges they have. They have an MT32 Pi in a cartridge that plugs in, and it's got a little display here and buttons just like the non-cartridge models of the MT32 that I'll talk about in a minute. But here is the most current case design that they have, and they offer this case design, the 3D print files to the public. So if you want to print it yourself, if you have a 3D printer or you got a makerspace you can go to, they can definitely print this for you. You'll have to get some of the screws and the fan yourself, because those are, not part of the 3D print. But almost all of the cases there, so you can do it yourself if you want to. I have bought 2 cases from them. I got a gray one and a black one, and they're really nice. It really makes the thing look like a console. MiSTer Add-ons is one of the manufacturers of a JAMMA card for the MiSTer, and the JAMMA is this edge over here that plugs into arcade systems that use JAMMA connectors, and it allows the MiSTer to feed the arcade CRT screen, the sound, as well as work with all the controllers. And it also has a CPS1 and CPS2 kick harness. So if you're putting it in a Capcom compatible arcade system, it can use that for some of the add-on buttons, I believe. And this thing, the MiSTer fits underneath it, kind of. You can't really see it because it would be underneath it. And they've got some optional add-ons for it, like a remote control. So if it's inside the arcade machine, you can easily control it from outside without having to open it up and get to the buttons and stuff. They also have an optional board where you can hook up 2 arcade systems together for those arcade games that did two players on 2 different screens with their own controls. It can do that sort of thing, I believe. And the board can actually drive 2 analog displays and 1 HDMI display. I am not that knowledgeable about JAMMA, and MiSTer Add-ons is not the only company who makes a board like this. I think there's at least 2 other companies, I believe, that are in Europe that make JAMMA boards. And the snack adapter is pretty interesting for anybody who has original controllers from their retro consoles. What it allows you to do is get adapters that will provide an interface that plugs into the MiSTer, and then plug in for your original controllers. Now, so in the example here on the slide, there's the NES adapter, and you can plug in an original NES controller, and that controller will only work for the NES core. It's like directly plugged into the core. It gives the hardware direct access to that. And you don't have to use just controllers. You can use things like the Zapper gun and that Power Glove and all that kind of stuff. That would plug into the same kind of connector for the NES. Same goes for the Super NES. You can use and the Genesis, and they've got adapters for most of the consoles that are out there, so you can use the original controllers, and those provide the lowest latency of all of them. Now, the USB controllers that you could use and the Bluetooth controllers you can use on Linux. MiSTer Add-ons website, they have a chart, and they've done latency tests on like over 100 different controllers, I believe, wired and wireless, and you can check out and see what the latency on those are. But the MiSTer, being an FPGA design, it has the lowest latency for input and output when compared to software-based emulators. Software-based emulators have to run in serial, and they can't do everything in parallel, whereas FPGA design, you've got the different components that would be on the motherboard that are in the hardware description language, and all of those components can run at the same time, and everything can run in parallel, and you have just the lowest latency. So it really very closely recreates the hardware. Some people call it hardware emulation, but it really is a recreation of the hardware. Here is an optional MT32 Pi. What this does is it's a Raspberry Pi with a couple of buttons and a little display screen, and a special build of Linux that automatically loads some MT32 software, which implements a MIDI synthesizer. And so you can use this to produce MIDI music from the 46SX core, which is called AO46, from the Atari ST core, from the Commodore Amiga core, and also from the Sharp X6800 Japanese computer core. And I think that's about it. There might be a couple other cores. So, for example, you can play games that use MIDI music. The Sierra games are very popular for that. They had a MIDI music option. On the Sharp X6800 core, which I didn't cover, it has lots and lots of games that do that. And the DOS games, also a lot of those have MIDI options, so it's cool. Now, on the Atari ST, that had originally a MIDI in and a MIDI out port, just part of the Atari ST hardware, and someone's made an adapter so that you can actually plug this in, and it gets directly into the Atari core, and you can run all of the MIDI music applications for music composition, music recording, music playback, sample transfers, and all that kind of stuff. All of the software that was very popular on the Atari ST in the mid to late 80s and early 90s that were used by professional musicians. I don't know, honestly, I don't know anybody who's actually using this, but to the best of my knowledge, it's supposed to work just like an Atari ST would. And you can find a lot of those MIDI programs if you look around on archive.org. All that stuff has been posted. All right, well, hopefully you learned a lot about the MiSTer. I went through a lot of material, and I know this is a long video, but I appreciate you watching. If you have any questions about the MiSTer, I'm the least familiar with a lot of the retro computers. I've always wanted to get into them. I haven't necessarily had time, but we need some documentation. We need some videos for these. I'd really like to get into the Coco 3 and try to run OS 9, or what is it called? A spin-off of that's currently still being developed and maintained. Not Nitrous 9, something like that. Anyway, enjoy it.